Hey everybody, Orel Bianikir here, and today I'm going to walk you through MINDst drums. We're going to do everything from installing, setting up the samples, to showing you what every button on screen does. So let's not waste any time, let's get to it. Immediately after purchasing MINDst drums, you'll receive an email that looks like this. It will indicate that your license is ready, it will be attached to this email, and you'll have download links below for the Mac and the Windows version. I'm going to save my license, and I can download through here, or I can show you another way. You can go to medallics.com, log in with your account, then click your profile, click My Orders. It will take a second and your products will appear over here. I have MINDst drums, I can download the license or an installer for my OS. So after we've done that, let's launch Cubase. Here we go, and I'm going to add an instrument. MINDst drums, it's all set up. I'm going to add a track. This is the way it's going to start up with the license activation prompt. You can either drag and drop your license file from your file system. I'm going to use the load license button here and find my license key, open it. Now you'll see license activated and I can click outside. That's step one. Step two would be to obtain the samples. You can do that by clicking here, opening the download samples menu, and then I'm presented with two options for my samples, the 16-bit option and the 24-bit option. The difference between them being mainly space on your hard drive and that extra quality you'll get from the 24-bit. I'm going to choose the 16-bit, and then I'm getting two options, download and copy URL. Download will just open your default browser and use that for the download. Copy URL is useful if you're using an external downloader of any kind. Once I click download, you'll see waiting for a secure link, and then my browser would open and start the download. Right after that, it's going to download a zip file that I'll need to extract somewhere on my hard drive. I extracted mine into my music folder. And then after I've done that, I'm going to locate samples. I'm going to go to my music folder and choose MINDst drums 16-bit. Click open. It's going to take a couple of seconds and your sample folder will appear and the samples have loaded. Now this is the main screen of MINDst drums. You have this beautiful purple kit here. It's surrounded by two menus, one on the left and one on the right, and a top toolbar. Let's go over everything. So starting from the top toolbar, on the upper left you have the license prompt, what we saw before. You can deactivate your license or deactivate all machines if you want to loosen up some licenses for your other computers. Keep in mind that you can purchase additional licenses. Each purchase will add 3 activations to your current license file. Moving on, we have the preset menu. Pretty standard stuff. Init preset will be a very dry sounding preset without any effects added. It's a good starting point if you just want a clean slate to design your own preset. The default preset is called Free or MINDst. It's our vision of one of the best ways to kind of present the samples in terms of processing and drum length and all that. You also have our factory library with presets from really cool people and artists such as John Lemkool, Mike Mallion, and other really cool cats. Presets divided by genres, very standard stuff. You have a user folder, and then you have the options to save to menu, save to file, load from file, show preset directory, reset screen size, and multi-out. Multi-out we'll go over later, but it's just good to know that it's here. One thing worth noting is that if you show the preset directory, you can see 4 presets here. If I add them to a folder, great, presets. The folder structure will be reflected here in the user area. So you see great presets, and I have my presets over here. Moving on, we have the MIDI player right here in the center. This is an ever-growing collection that we will keep adding to of MIDI grooves and loops in all kinds of genres, from people like Doron Giat, who sampled this entire instrument, did a fantastic job. It's just a tremendous drummer. He also curated the sounds here, so every cymbal is a custom series of cymbals, and the drum kit is something he ordered that there's only one of those in existence, so it's worth noting. Mike Mallion and Jonathan Meltzer worked with us in Beat Scholar. Let's check out some grooves, but before, it's worth mentioning that the play button here won't do anything unless your transport on Cubase or your DAW is playing. So I'm going to press play here and both press spacebar on my keyboard. All right, that was cool. The tempo here, because I'm running MINDst in the DAW, is not usable. I can kind of mess it around, but it always returns and snaps back to your DAW's tempo. And if I like the file that's playing here, I can drag it out either to my hard drive or to my DAW. So let's do that for a second. Let's minimize the screen here. And then I can click this and drag my MIDI file out here. And then I'm able to use it without the MIDI player at all. So let's see that it plays. Cool. So this is a fun way you can kind of construct songs. You can just choose one, play, audition it, and then add it to your composition, and that way kind of construct different parts for your songs. The next button is the mixer button. It will switch to the mixer screen. We'll go over that in a bit. Over here we have the MIDI map. We did our best to streamline this whole process. You can change hi-hat settings here. We'll go over that in a bit. You can decide on all sorts of ways to organize by notes or by numbers, accidentals, sharps or flats, your middle C octave, and then if you want to sort by instrument or sort by pitch going up. You have presets for all the major drum setups, so you can just plant MINDst drums in whatever production you already have and just change the mapping here to Ableton or Addictive or whatever it is you're replacing. And then you have all the view modes here. Now, basic will just include the main articulations for every drum as they are mapped. It's a more organized way to kind of browse through what's going on. And then if you want more in-depth views of everything, you can select individual modes like kick and toms, snare, which has a bunch of articulations we can go through, hi-hat, cymbals, and then all, which is just an enormous list of everything we've sampled. MINDst drums really has a lot of articulations for you to choose from, especially in the hi-hat and the snare. As you can see here, we'll go over each one in the plugin. Now, the MIDI map window is also a great way to kind of get to know MINDst, because we have a lot of samples going on here. And if you really want to get to know the differences between our articulations and make the best selections for your track, you can audition the samples here and kind of listen to the difference between snare zones, between the overtone samples and the center samples, rim shots, side sticks, and everything else. So you can just audition with this button here. And then you can either type in a number or a note. You can MIDI learn, delete, and duplicate. Now, you can't delete an articulation that's mapped. You can completely remove it. You can only delete duplicates. Moving on here, you can reopen the download samples menu if you want to re-download the sample base or download the higher quality version. It's available for you. Moving on to the main area, which is the reason we're here. Now, clicking on each drum will naturally audition its current state. So starting over here on the left side of the screen, we have the drum menu. Selecting a drum will change the menu to adjust the settings of the drum you've selected. So selecting the kick here and going from top to bottom, you can enable and disable the drum. This would actually remove it from everywhere in the plugin, so this is a very destructive thing to do. That's in the case that you want to listen to something and completely remove the bass drum from all bleeds, overheads, just about everywhere. Same goes for the volume here. So these controls, the solo, the enable, disable, and the volume, they affect the drum's representation in the plugin entirely. So keep in mind that lowering the volume here will make sure the drum is heard less everywhere. And each drum is captured by several mics. Keep in mind that if you want to maintain a sort of contextual feeling, touching this button isn't recommended, but you can play around with it and experiment. Maybe you have a good reason for it. Here you have the name of the drum, and then you have the drum menu, which features knobs that are common to all the drums. The tune knob can be used to raise or lower the pitch of a drum. You have attack, hold, and release buttons that will shape the transient and the sustain of the drum. The overlap will determine the transitional release time when a drum is played subsequently several times. So let's say if I play several kick drums in a row, if I want really clean hits and transients, I will set the overlap to be really low. That would mean that the kick drum sustain is not playing on the next attack. Setting it up higher would actually mean that the kick drum is played entirely every time. Over here we have a subsynth. This is a unique feature to the bass drum. You can adjust the pitch and the level of it, and then shape the overall character, the attack, ADSR of it, and etc. And then let's listen to it. Hopefully you're not listening on a phone or something. That's a funny demo if you are. But anyway, this is a great way to kind of have a steady low end regardless of what's happening in the mics. This kit has a lot of variety, and sometimes variety is not good and you want something more steady in the low end. This is a great way to achieve that and also make your kicks a bit beefier, which is great. And the last thing that's common to all the drums and cymbals is the velocity curve. You can adjust it. You can double click to add points. Right clicking it will open a menu that allows you to copy paste curves between drums and invert it or reset it if you're just happy the way it is. Last thing here, we have the one-shot button. It's fairly standard in samplers. It just means that the note off will determine the end of the note, or if the sample will be played fully every time. Moving on to the snare. The snare has some unique features we need to go through. First of all, let's start with the articulation mixer. Over here in the fader, little fader icon here. So over here we have the articulation mixer. These are the three main articulations for the snare. Now keep in mind that changing these will affect the representation of the rim shot, the side stick, and the center snare in every microphone in the kit. So again, this is a possibly destructive thing to do, but we trust your judgment to control it wisely. And just if all you ever want is just less rim shot or less side stick in your groove, you can just lower it like that. Moving on, we have the snare settings. Now you see this area is a bit different than what we had in the kick. In the kick we had the subsynth here, and here we have the snare controls. Now we have three zones. So the snare was entirely sampled in three areas. The main snare trigger, which is D1 in my keyboard, will play the default snare setting here. So let's listen to zone A, zone B, zone C. Now this is a really cool way to kind of almost EQ the snare differently. Each one of the zones has a slightly different dynamic behavior, and it has different harmonic content. For instance, the center snare is a bit more open sounding, and the side of the snare might have a little bit more of an overtone. Over here you can adjust the leading hand. Now the MINDst engine does a lot of musical choices for you, one of them being which hand is supposed to play each drum according to our algorithms. So you can start with the right or the left, which basically is similar to deciding if your drummer is right-handed or left-handed. Usually this problem is more for the backliner and the drum tech, but here we give you this option because it's sort of another cool way to create variation. So if you're listening to the same loop for a while and you just want it slightly different, you can adjust that. This is kind of an indication of the level of nuance we're working with here. Moving on to the velocity curve, you'll see we have controls here that we didn't have in the kick as well. We can decide on the default articulation for the center snare and then for the side stick. Now we can set that the default articulation is a rim shot, side stick, or center snare. And the same thing goes for the side stick articulations. Now we have a bunch of custom articulations here. We have side stick high and low, flam, flam center, and then we have drag. Now changing these will actually change the default articulation in the note that's mapped to be the default center snare and the default side stick. That doesn't mean you can't also map them to additional notes, but sometimes you don't want to use a bunch of different notes to write your snare parts. You just want every snare to be a rim shot, and that's it. Another cool feature here is the split. Now this can save you some time in your drum programming because it will allow you to determine a certain velocity level that beyond it the articulation would change. That means that if I set it up to be like at 85, that means that the center snare will play on velocities 1 to 85, and beyond that a rim shot will be played. Let's check it out. This is a cool way to save yourself some programming time. Plenty of times we're composing a groove and it's very natural that the loudest hit, you would want it to be a rim shot rather than a center snare to just have that extra oomph. Same goes for side stick, and everywhere basically this control appears, You can kind of design your drummer and have like multiple articulations mapped to the same key. There's all sorts of advantages to doing this. The hi-hat, similarly to the snare, has some unique features here in the hi-hat settings. Over here we have the alternate hands button. It's a pretty cool setting. Let's listen to it. The alternate hands button will determine if the hi-hat samples are being played with just one hand, which in this case would be the right hand, or if the drummer would alternate between right and left. Now this is pretty cool because it kind of allows you to determine the flow on the hi-hat, especially if you're playing 16-note hi-hats or very busy parts. The single hand sound is more stiff and regular, and then the alternate hand sound maybe has a bit more of flow to it and slightly more natural dynamics. Moving on here, we have the hi-hat mode. The fixed mode will just allow you to determine how closed and how open the hi-hat is in both standard keys, so the default closed button and the default open. Now you have several other modes here. If you're playing V drums, you can adjust the sensitivity here using the curve and the CC of the hi-hat, the standard being 4. And then you have MIDI CC mode, which is similar, but it's meant for using your modulation wheel to control how open the hi-hat is. So this curve will adjust the sensitivity, and then you have the CC for your modulation. On the hi-hat here, you have the velocity curve, same as everywhere else, and you can decide between shank and tip as the default articulation, as well as split between them and make sure tip is only played on the lower volumes. It's more suitable like that anyway. The last drum that has some unique options is the ride. It has an articulation mixer. It has bow, bell, and crash volumes. And then it also has a velocity split between, you can choose between bow, bell, and crash as the standard. And then you can also split between two articulations in order to kind of have both of them on the same key. On the right side of the screen here, we have the master model. You can open the master velocity curve, and this is a very powerful way to kind of adjust the velocity behavior of the entire kit. It calculates, of course, after all the other velocity curves, so it's pretty powerful, as I said before. Same as before, you can adjust it to your liking, maybe make it more difficult to reach the top velocity. This control becomes really cool because of the sheer amount of samples we have at each velocity layers. So let's say even if you're limited to something like this range can sound just as a sampler on its own. You won't feel like anything is missing. So I recommend playing around with it, and maybe that way you'll be able to fine-tune your velocity behavior for the plugin and just keep it at that. It saves with the preset, so once you find it, you know, it's yours to keep. Moving on, you have multi-out presets. We'll go over those in the mixer. It's another place. It's exactly the same as I've shown in the preset menu, but it's just another place to set it up. You have master volume and then velocity to volume. This control is fairly important. It determines how accentuated the difference in volume is between velocity layers. Onto the mixer screen. This is the mixer screen. You have several parts here. So starting, you have a top toolbar for the mixer. You have the fader area. You have the master channel. And then you have what we call the detail area. This place changes according to your selections. We'll go over that in a second. So first of all, the top toolbar here has two buttons to decide what kind of mixer you want to view. Main view or all view. The main view basically features the most important groups, and it's meant as sort of an overview of what's going on in your drum sounds. A sort of summary, let's say after your sound guy already did all the detail, then he sums everything up to groups. So kick, snare, hi-hat, overheads, room mics, cymbal mics, and toms. The all view is sort of a more detailed approach. You get individual instruments instead of groups and all that. You have mixer presets, which are tied to the main preset, but also can be separate. So you can decide on a preset for the entire plugin. That means the ADSR settings, the hi-hat settings, all that stuff I showed you in the kit screen. And then you can also browse the sound presets on top of that. You can lock the presets. So that means that this preset won't change when I switch the main preset. You can reset the mixer. Again, you have the multi-out button to apply multi-output presets. And then you have master, solo, and mute, which is usable to just unsolo and unmute, basically. Once you have something soloed, this button will light up and you can unsolo everything. That's the top toolbar. Moving on to the master section, if I click the master channel, I have a width control and I have the master volume. The width control is a very effective way to kind of narrow the stereo width, maybe create a more focused sound or completely flip the perspective without going through every single pan. Master volume is, just the master volume. Anyway, moving on, we have effects here. These effects are applied to the master output of the mixer. We have a drive with a bit crusher, a compressor, and a low-pass filter. The second tab on the master section is reverbs. We have two types of reverb in MINDst. One of them is a studio and one of them is a plate. The studio reverb has 4 room types, each with its own distinct flavor. We have tight, thick, big, hot, and clean. You also have filters here. You can decide the frequency and the gain for the low shelf and the high shelf, as well as overall level. Down here we have plate. We again have 4 types of plates here. And with the filters and the level, same as before, you can also bypass them. Something important to know is that turning these off will save a bunch of CPU. So if you're running tight on CPU and you want to share reverbs that you already have running, this would be a smart move, just turning these off. Now each channel I select over here will open up its settings on the right side detail area here. Now on the channels themselves, you have pan, solo, mute. You can quickly turn compressor and EQ on and off for each one. And then you have sends for studio and the plate reverbs I showed before, and of course volume. So from top to bottom we have mic controls, we have bleed controls, and then we have processing. This is the structure of every single channel that I'll select here. This is the order that things will appear in. Now the kick has 4 channels in its mic area. It has in, out, condenser, and a sub. Now each mic here has an EQ. You can just set it up and forget it. Just put this on anywhere and then close it and it automatically saves. You can also open the sub settings from here. There's a little pop-up window and you can see the sub settings, same as I showed you in the kit window. Mic bleeds is a very important element of sound when capturing a drum kit. Basically, the meaning of it is that every mic in the kit captures every other instrument. There's no real method to isolate in a real recording. In a plugin, we can do stuff that's not available in reality, thus allowing us to really fine-tune which mic captures which drum. Now here, I'm on the kick channel, and I have kick, snare, overhead, and room. Now this will determine how the kick as an instrument is heard by the snare mics, by the overhead mics, and by the room mics. If I want to dig a little bit deeper, I have the bleed mixer here. You'll notice it says bleeds from. I can balance between the direct sound and the bleed sound. And then I can determine how these instruments are heard by the bass drum mics. So this would mean how loud the snare is in the kick mic, the hi-hat is, and the toms. On the bottom here, we have the processing area. It has 4 tabs. It has a drive with a bit crusher, compressor, and EQ, and then the sends. You can turn them on or off using the little toggles here. The upper area of the drive module has mix, bits, and hold. These controls affect the shape of the bit crushing, and the mix knob mixes between the clean signal and the distorted signal. The mix knob also affects the drive down here, so it's shared by the crusher and the drive. You have 2 filters, high pass filter and a low pass filter, and a gain slider here. Keep in mind that this entire thing is a device, and like I said before, the mix knob is shared between them, and the drive also affects the character of the bit crusher. The compressor has ratio, mix, makeup, attack, threshold, and release, fairly standard stuff. If I play a drum, you'll notice the reduction meter popping up here. It's a good way to know where you're at in terms of gain reduction. The EQ has 4 bands, low mid, low shelf, and high shelf. The shelves can also be turned into filters, high pass filter and a low pass filter. The snare channel is fairly similar to the kick channel. It has 4 mics here, a top, a bottom mic, and then a secondary top and a condenser. Now keep in mind that not every drum mix needs every microphone open. It's actually recommended that if you can find a real good balance, you maybe start off by muting some microphones. So most snares would actually be recorded with 1 top mic and 1 bottom mic, And that means you can start off like this by muting the other mics, find a good balance between them, try to adjust between the harmonic content of the snare top, which would capture more of the hit and the overtone, and the bottom, which will capture the actual snare sound. You can also EQ them. It's much easier to start off like this, and then when you know what you're missing in terms of sonic character, you can try and get that from the other microphones. So this is a good tip if you're just starting out with doing kit mixes. I'm personally fairly new to mixing drum kits, and this is one tip that Eyal gave me that really helped me out. Basically, you don't need all the microphones, you just need the ones that sound good for what it is you're trying to do. So a major difference between the snare and the kick channels is that the snare bleed mixer is much more detailed. Now, such a big part of drum sound is how the different drums affect the snare. There's a sort of sympathetic resonance that we're very used to hearing between every piece of the kit and the snare drum. It basically shifts and moves and resonates in harmony with the toms, the cymbals, and everything. When balanced right, it just makes everything feel more realistic and tied together. So let's listen to it for a second. Let's take something that has a lot of snare in it. So let's listen to what's going on here. I'm going to play the groove and then solo the snare. I'm going to raise the bleed master volume. So you'll notice that you can almost mix the entire kit just using the snare mic. Now this is a very powerful thing to understand, because if you're really missing some sort of feeling of glue and context between the instrument, using the snare bleeds is a great way to kind of even that out and make sure everything really feels tied together. So the hi-hat is fairly similar. It has two microphones. The overhead and room channels are different. They have their own bleed controls. Now, these aren't exactly the same as the snare and kick bleeds, because these are actually a bit more important, I would say. The controls here determine how every instrument is heard by the overheads. The overheads are one of the most quintessential microphone sets in the kit. They're supposed to also give that contextual feeling, that stereo width. And usually a lot of character and sense of depth is determined by the positioning of the overheads and the type of microphone, and etc. So because this is a sampler, we can actually balance the different drums as they are heard by the overheads. This is a fairly powerful feature because it will allow you to kind of create stuff that's not necessarily realistic but sounds really, really tight. And maybe you want a mix that has a very closed mic feeling. But you still want a kick drum that's very resonant and kind of wide in a sense. So that would mean that I would turn down all the other drums and cymbals and then leave maybe the kick drum up. So let's listen to the overheads with the kick turned up and all the other drums turned down. As you can hear, the kick drum is heard much more than all the rest of the instruments, and this would contribute to the kick having a more spacious feeling. The room channel is used to give a greater sense of depth and width to the sound, even more than the overheads. The overheads are closer to the kit. They capture much more content. The room mics are great for, first of all, driving them. This is one of my favorite things to do, is to just distort the room mics, and this sort of adds this great crunchiness to the sound without actually affecting the clarity of each individual drum. Also, compressing them quite heavily sometimes is nice because you get added sustain for the drums. This is a great flavor channel. This is a great channel to experiment with, put reverbs on, sort of beat into all sorts of shapes and then balance it and mix it into your sound. Cymbals and toms are the last set of faders here in the main view. Choosing the cymbals will show the individual cymbals here, with options to level and pan, solo, and mute each one. And then you have processing that will be applied to the entire group. That means all of these cymbals will go through whatever is going on here. Same goes for toms. You have two toms and a floor tom. You can balance them, pan them, and process them as a group. I want to show you the all view for a second. The all view is our detailed view for the mixer. It will show each instrument separately. You'll notice that now, instead of a cymbals fader that contains all the cymbals, I can get the flat ride, for instance, as its own instrument with its own bleed controls and processing. If you want to dig deeper and look for a specific sound on one of the cymbals or the drums, you can do it like this. Heavy use of the close mics of the cymbals is not recommended. It's not a very realistic sound. Usually you don't close mic every cymbal. You just capture them with the overheads and perhaps another condenser in the room. Usually you just don't place a microphone on every cymbal, but you do sometimes on ride cymbals and hi-hats and stuff like that. So I'd recommend processing the cymbals as a whole and balancing them. And then only if you're really missing something from a cymbal, just going on to the all view and just adjusting it like that. We thought of the main view in a way that you won't be missing anything to really fine-tune your drum sound without going into the all view, but it's still there in case you want to. The last thing I need to show you here is the multi-out mode. You can actually route the channels here in several ways out of MINDst and into multiple microphones in several ways. Now, first of all, each channel has on the bottom of it a label that says master. If I click it, you'll see that it's divided into DAW and internal. Internal is the default setting. If it says master, it just means that the channel is going through the master channel I showed you before over here of MINDst's mixer. The DAW list here is all the channels that will be shown once I activate multi-out mode and open the channels. These are the names of the channels that will be shown, and I can route them individually like this. Same goes for mic channels, only here I can choose on the top label. If I click it, this opens up and I can route them individually. But the recommended way to do it is with the presets we provided. If you click multi-out, stereo is the default mode. If I click groups, you'll notice that down here, these change to their respective groups. If I click groups bass drum and snare, that means that only the kick and snare mics will be routed into individual channels, while the rest of the microphones will be routed as groups. And the last setting is all mics. I'm going to click it right now and show you how to do that in Cubase. We'll be releasing videos on how to do that in just about any DAW. All mics is the most detailed mode, so I might as well show that. Going back to Cubase, I'm going to open Studio and go into VST Instruments. I have MINDst drums here. I can click this Activate Outputs button and select all outputs. You see that all of them are ticked. You have a nice naming scheme here, courtesy of Vial. And then I can click this little arrow. And I'm getting overhead, room, kick, snare, hi-hat, tom, cymbals. These are the groups. And then the microphones in, out, condenser, sub, top, bottom, etc., etc. This might seem overwhelming at first, but maybe through the MINDst mixer and the experience we shaped here, you'll also start to feel comfortable with the multi-out mode. This mode will allow you to further shape your drum sound using third-party plugins and stuff we're not making yet.